Alright, so Chapter 3, Information Systems, Organizations, and Strategy. Who's read the chapter so far? Pretty managerial. I think this one for how many people have an undergraduate in management or marketing? Good portion of you. Okay. And how many people have heard of Porter's 5 Forces? Okay, so you should have a pretty good grasp on this chapter even if you haven't read it. So information systems, organizations, and strategy. So we'll start out with identify and describe important features of organizations that managers need to know about in order to build and use information systems successfully. So it starts to talk about organizations, what an organization is, and all that. This isn't magic. It's pretty much what it sounds like. Demonstrate how Porter's competitive forces model helps companies develop competitive strategies using information systems. So we're going to talk about Porter's 5 Forces a little bit, and we'll talk about how information systems can be used to help you out with respect to some of those threats. They're not always threats. In some cases, they're opportunities, and information systems can turn those into opportunities. So, explain how the value chain and value web models help businesses identify opportunities for strategic information system applications. Porter also came up with this idea of the value chain and talked about that. And for the most part, there was nothing wrong with that, particularly before the internet, before you saw the widespread application of technology to organizations. Because of the speed of change that the internet provides, it allows organizations to do, you see some changes in organizational structure. And because of that, you've seen adaptations to that model. And that's where we get the value web from, and we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get there. Demonstrate how information systems help businesses use synergies, core competencies, network-based strategies to achieve competitive advantage, and assess the challenges posed by strategic information systems and management solutions. So it starts out with a case study. It talks about AT&T and Verizon. And I really hope they're wrong because I don't have stock in Verizon. I do have it in AT&T. So that's a problem for me. It says to me I need to sell pretty quick. They talk about AT&T's strategy of basically putting off expensive costs. They don't want to invest in their network because it's expensive. Putting up towers, buying rights to property, a lot of that stuff is expensive to do. At the same time, Verizon, their main competitor, that's exactly what they've done. They've put that money in. They've invested a lot of that money into their network. As a result, they have a lot more coverage, a lot better coverage than AT&T. AT&T's strategy, conversely, has been to offer lots of bells, buzzers, and whistles. The Apple iPhone, for example. And that was great as long as that contract was in place. That contract has run out. Now you're starting to see other carriers, specifically Verizon, being able to carry the Apple iPhone. So now AT&T's kind of behind the 8 ball. They've got to make a decision. They've either got to come up with some killer application again, something along the lines of the iPhone, which doesn't happen all the time, or they've got to invest in their network. I would submit that that's part of the reason that they ended up buying T-Mobile, was to expand some of their coverage. They don't talk about that in the case, but that's really what I think that some of that's about, is about being able to bolster some of their weakness with respect to coverage. So organizations and information systems. Information technology and organization influence one another. They impact one another. So information technology affects us as an organization. It changes the things that we can do. At the same time, we can influence technology. As an organization, we might have the need for a particular technology or a particular process that we need done, a particular service, a particular product, something that we need done. And we can combine different technologies in new and unique ways to be able to do that. We can write code to be able to do some of these things. So we can impact technology. Technology can impact us. It's a two-way street. And it affects our organizational structure, some of those business processes that we've talked about, politics within an organization, the culture within an organization. These are all dynamic components to an organization. So we kind of see this relationship between information technology and organizations. Technology makes us change as an organization as we, for example, require fewer middle managers. We can automate more things. It changes our organizational structure. So what is an organization exactly? Well, depends on how you want to look at it. probably more technical definition, a stable, formal social structure that takes resources from the environment and processes them to produce outputs. That should sound familiar to you. When we go back to chapter 1, remember the IPO model, input, process, output? There's a lot of things you can look at from that perspective. We've got to take various inputs, raw materials that we're going to purchase as an organization. Say you're a car manufacturer. You're going to purchase tires. You're going to purchase metal. You're going to purchase oil. You're going to purchase all these various things in glass, all these various things that you're going to need to produce automobiles. You've got to process it. You've got to convert that steel into fenders and bumpers and all those types of things. And then you got to have some kind of an output and a completed product that rolls off the assembly line that you can sell eventually. So it's the same basic model that's occurring. Another technical definition, a formal legal entity with internal rules and procedures as well as a social structure. A more behavioral definition would be a collection of rights, privileges, obligations, and responsibilities that is delicately balanced over a period of time through conflict and conflict resolution. That conflict and conflict resolution is something that's going to come up over and over again because organizations have politics in them. You may or may not enjoy politics. Politics are a fact of life. They exist in academia. They exist in large corporations. They're all around us, and they're fighting for scarce resources. So when we talk about that input, process, output model, those inputs, there's limited resources to buy those inputs, to buy those raw materials. And you've got to fight, depending on the division head that you happen to be, you've got to fight for those resources so that you can accomplish your goal. So there's kind of a graphical representation of the technical definition of an organization. Again, you see the same thing, inputs, the area where processing is actually done, the car is manufactured, for example, and then the output, the car that you ultimately produce. And you really should have some kind of feedback. I mean, hopefully your employees are purchasing cars, and there's a need to you get money back as a corporation from those cars that are purchased. You can then buy more materials, produce more cars. And then the same type of thing from a behavioral view. Again, input, processing, and output. Environmental resources. The organization itself has a hierarchy, has a division of labor, people that make decisions. Rules and procedures. So you've heard of the chain of command. Organizations usually have a distinct chain of command. Various business processes, rights, obligations, etc. So some of the features of organizations, they usually have a hierarchical structure. There's somebody in charge, there's somebody that does the work, and then there's usually people in the middle that do whatever it is that they do. There's usually accountability, authority, and system of impartial decision making. That's the goal anyway. You hope they're impartial. You hope that they're hiring the best qualified people rather than, you hope nepotism isn't occurring. You're hoping that they're hiring the best people. You're hoping that they're scheduling people fairly as far as their jobs that they're scheduled to work, things like that. So you hope that that authority isn't being abused. There's adherence to principles of efficiency. You hope that there's not a lot of waste going on. The more waste that's occurring, the less profitable you are as a firm. Makes it hard to be competitive. Routines and business processes, organizational politics, culture, environments, and structures. These last two we'll look at a little bit more over the next few slides. So routine and business process. Routines are standard operating procedures. So, our opening procedures that we have in the morning. You go in, you unlock the door, you turn off the alarm. First things you do, you turn on the lights, you take out the trash, all those. You get the facility ready for customers to come in. You do whatever it is that you do as an organization. You set up those routines so that the employees know exactly what it is that they're expected to do. Business processes, collection of routines. We've already talked about that in Chapter 2, so you should have a pretty good grasp on that. And a business firm is a collection of business processes. That's what we talked about in the homework just a little bit ago. That we can look at an organization as a series of business processes. You can look at it kind of like that, as a kind of a graphical representation if you want to look at it from the entire firm perspective. Like I said a minute ago, organizational politics occurs inside an organization. That's just a fact, whether you like it or not. There's divergent viewpoints that lead to political struggle and competition and conflict. The fact is that there are limited resources. Even if you're the government, there's limited resources. You only have so much money that you can spend, and you have to figure out the best way to allocate those expenses, those purchases, the things that you're doing. You can only work people so many hours in a week. There's 24 hours in a day. If you schedule them for 25, there's going to be a problem. So there are organizational politics that exist inside of an organization, and you have to reach some kind of a happy medium. You have to determine what's the best allocation for those resources, given the mission, given the goals of the organization. So you kind of have to, it's kind of a balancing act. Political resistance greatly hampers organizational change. The reality is that people don't like change. We like to get into our set ways. We like to do the same thing over and over again so we know what's expected. And that's a problem when you get into organizations, especially organizations in certain fields. High-tech firms, for example. It's such a dynamic environment. It's constantly changing. It makes it very hard for people to get into those set ways. At the same time, they still have that tendency. They still want to be able to do that so they know what's expected. So when you start talking about organizations that have been around for a very long time, and it's time for a change, it's time to implement a new system to address some shortcoming that competitors have already addressed, so you're kind of behind the 8 ball, that makes it tough because you've got this new system you want to implement, but a lot of your users are really going to be resistant to use that new system. So you got to figure out a way to convince them to do that. Organizational culture encompasses a set of assumptions that define goal and product. What products the organization produce, how and where it should be produced, and for whom the product should be produced. May be powerful unifying force as well as a restraint on change. Some organizations embrace change. They absolutely like it. And if you can, as an organizational leader, if you can develop that culture inside of an organization to be able to accept change and embrace it, you're actually much better off. You're your workforce will tend to be much more accepting of new products, changes in the workforce, changes in the marketplace that need to come about. So if you have a system that needs to be implemented, they're much more likely to try it out, to give you feedback as to this is what's working in the system and this is what's not working in the system, so that you can improve it. If you don't have that kind of organizational culture, you fall back into what we were talking about just a second ago, where people simply don't use it. Organizations and environments have a reciprocal relationship. The organization works very closely with the environment, and the environment has an impact on us as an organization. So, for example, an organization can kind of influence its own environment. We send lobbyists to Washington, for example, to try to have an impact on regulations, our regulatory environment. At the same time, the government puts regulations on us as an industry or us as an individual firm. So there's kind of that symbiotic relationship between the two. They work together. They can influence one another. Environments generally change faster than organizations. This is what we were talking about just a second ago. People get set in their ways. They don't want to change. This is what they're used to. That's the way it's always been done. That's the way we always want to do it. And that's fine, but from an environmental perspective, there's so many other influences that are going on in terms of other organizations, in terms of other industries that impact our industry, that you tend to see a lot more dynamics occurring. And so as a result, the environment tends to change at a faster pace than our organizations. Ideally, our organizations would be able to adapt faster. It just doesn't occur because of human nature. Information systems can be an instrument of environmental scanning and act as a lens. So the idea is that we can use our information systems as a way to look at that environment. As an organization, we can look out into the world. We can monitor the various regulations that exist in our industry. We can look at the economic systems, the economics that are occurring around us in terms of unemployment, in terms of inflation, things like that. We can use our information system to basically identify the various things that have an impact on us as an organization. That can be good. That can be a good thing. That can also be a bad thing. It gives us one place to go to really kind of get the pulse on what's going on around us. At the same time, as managers, we tend to sometimes rely too much on the reports that we're interested in. We get used to seeing a report in a particular way. We look for those specific things. And as long as those reports are telling us everything is okay, everything's okay. But that may not actually be reality. There may be other things that our information system is filtering out that we're not seeing that would otherwise, they would tell us otherwise. So that's something to be aware of, that we can't monitor everything. So you have to be aware of that. Okay. Disruptive technologies. Anybody come up with an example of a disruptive technology? What do you think of when you hear disruptive technology?
Streaming video.
Streaming video. I think the music industry, the television companies, the movie industry, I think they would say that's an extremely disruptive technology. It's threatening the way they're used to doing business. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to go out of business. It means they've got to address it. If they ignore it, it likely will hurt them very badly. At the same time, if they can modify their business model, maybe they can capture that. Maybe they can be in on the ground floor and actually take advantage. It can be an opportunity rather than a threat. Technology that brings about sweeping change to businesses, industries, and markets. So personal computers, word processing, software, the internet, the PageRank algorithm. Anybody know what the PageRank algorithm is? It's Google's algorithm. Believe it or not, it has nothing to do with web pages. One of the founders of Google's last name is Page. So he's the one that came up with it. Basically, generically speaking, they don't tell anybody what it actually is, but generically speaking, it's basically an algorithm for Google that says the more high-quality links you have to your site, the higher up your page will show. It'll show closer to the top. So at a kind of a generic level, that's what the algorithm does.
You can look up most of it.
Pardon?
You can look up most of it to get yours way up there.
Yeah, there's certain things you can do to try to improve your ranking, but Google will tell you, and I don't know how much they actually do this, but Google will tell you that if you monkey, for example, too much with the meta tags, if you're creating too many links from poor sites to your site, that they will actually downgrade your page rank based on that. How much they actually do that, I don't know. But then they talk about first movers and fast followers. First movers are inventors of disruptive technologies. They're the ones that come out with it. So anybody come up with an example of that?
YouTube.
Pardon?
YouTube.
That's an example. My thought was eBay. Was another one, not in terms of auctions, those have been around a long time, but in terms of taking auctions online, opening up a market to a much larger market, certainly a first mover. Probably a good example of a bad first mover. It's not always a good idea to be the first mover. It's good to get in on the ground floor if you do it right. The example I came up with was Sony's Betamax. And most of you probably don't remember that, but they were the first one to really produce a consumer-grade videotape that you could record on playback movies. It was a superior technology to what eventually became the competitor VHS tapes. The problem that they fell into was much what Apple used to fall into. They had a great product. They didn't have a lot of tapes that could be played in it. So the content wasn't out there. VHS, on the other hand, was owned by H.Schuessler, which is the parent company to Panasonic, Technics, and Quasar. They licensed everybody and their brother to make VHS tapes. So the machines were everywhere. Now, if you're a movie studio and you want to put out tapes, do you want to put it out on tapes that can only be played on Sony machines, or do you want to put it out on machines that can be played on Panasonic, Technics, Quasar, JVC, Samsung, all these other manufacturers? Well, the money is with all those manufacturers. There's a lot more hardware out there to support that VHS format. So as a result, you had a first mover who kind of created a market of demand for people wanting to be able to record television shows, wanting to be able to play back tapes. They created the market, but because of lack of content, they couldn't. It really kind of killed their own competitive advantage.
Learn their lesson with Blu-ray.
Say again? Yeah.
Learn their lesson with Blu-ray.
Yeah, they absolutely did. Sony did a much better job with Blu-ray than HD DVD. Sony they learn things. They do. So did Apple. You look at Apple, kind of went through the same exact thing. Everything was proprietary with Apple. They finally started opening things up in terms of source to allow developers to create content for their their iPad, their iPhone, all those various things, as opposed to developing everything in-house, which is the way it used to be. When everything was developed in-house, very good stuff. Steve Jobs wouldn't let anything go out that wasn't high quality, but you simply didn't have the volume. You didn't have the stuff out there that people were demanding in terms of in terms of content. Now there's content everywhere for Apple stuff, and they're doing much better. Fast followers is probably a pretty safe place to be in. You look at somebody like Google is probably a good example. They weren't the first search engine. They're just the biggest now, and there's a reason for it. They basically looked and saw a market opportunity and said, people need to be able to search things. They need to be able to find things efficiently and quickly on the internet. So they developed a very intuitive search engine model in terms of the screen, the display page. If you look at Yahoo, you look at a lot of the other ones, they're really more of portals than they are actual search engines, because you've got everything on them. They're throwing all this content at you. Google just wanted a page that loads really fast, because you're just trying to do a search, and that's what they've done. Their algorithm was different. Instead of relying just on keywords to be able to identify and categorize various web pages, they use a PageRank approach. It's a different approach, and it's paid off for them. And you can see them as kind of a fast follower. So 5 basic kinds of organizational structure: entrepreneurial, machine bureaucracy, divisionalized bureaucracy, professional bureaucracy, college, and adhocracy. So entrepreneurial, small businesses, usually one person startup, maybe a small partnership, that type of thing. Machine bureaucracy could really be a fairly large firm, but they're usually operating within one industry. They're doing one thing, that type of thing. As opposed to divisionalized bureaucracy, they may be operating in maybe a huge corporation that's operating in multiple industries. Professional bureaucracy, usually law firms, school systems, universities, hospitals, those types of things. And adhocracy, things like consulting firms, Accenture, and stuff like that. And then there's other organizational features, goals, constituencies. Who are these organizations beholden to? I mean, they've got their customers, they've got their employees, they've got stockholders, and if they're a publicly traded company. They've got different leadership styles, different tasks, different environments, what countries they operate in, the regulatory environments that they operate in. Economic impacts. IT changes relative cost of capital and cost of information. We can use technology to kind of offset some of our capital expenditures in other areas. That's something that takes a little bit of time to kind of wrap your head around. Information systems technology is a factor of production like capital and labor. It affects the costs and quality of information and changes the economics of information. We can gather a lot more information, process it, and produce more meaningful results than we once could. So information technology helps firms contract in size because it can reduce transaction costs, costs of participating in marketing, and produce outsourcing opportunities. So transaction costs are the costs that occur when we go to purchase something. We have a transaction. We have to pay employees. It's a transaction. Well, it costs us money to conduct that transaction. We have time with respect to employees. We've got to calculate how much did they work. We've got to verify how much they were scheduled to work versus how much they actually worked. We've got to write the check. We've got to process it once the check goes through the banking system. We've got to reconcile our checking account. So there's a cost associated with that transaction. Same thing with sales. There's a cost associated with that transaction. If we take a credit card, we pay the credit card processing company a percentage, usually a base fee and a percentage, to do that transaction. We have to pay for paper for that transaction to be printed out on. We have to pay for the person to sit there and collect money. All those types of things. There's costs associated with that. If we can get those transaction costs down, that gives us a competitive advantage over people who are less efficient. So this is where the theory of transaction cost theory comes in. Firms seek to economize on transaction costs cost of participating in market. And that's where the idea of vertical integration comes into play. If we're GM and we want to try to reduce some of our transaction costs, we can purchase some of our suppliers. Let's buy a steel company. So then we don't have to buy steel from a steel company and pay their markup. We've still got to pay for the raw materials to make the steel, but we're not taking the markup again once it's been turned into a product that we can purchase from a steel company because we own that steel company now. Same thing with our distributors. If we own our distributors, we don't have to deal with salespeople to deal with those distributors. They're our distributors. They take our product and sell it to the retailers. So that's one way of trying to reduce transaction costs. Another way is through the use of technology. Technology can really help us to streamline a lot of those processes, and as a result, we can still have that steel company be independent. We can still have those distributors be independent, and technology can be used to drive down some of those costs by automating a lot of the processes. So IT can help lower market transaction costs for a firm. So you can kind of see this relationship here between firm size and transaction costs. If we can keep our transaction costs low, we can actually keep our firm size relatively low. We don't have to integrate. We don't have to vertically integrate. And that's the idea behind that. Another theory is this concept of agency theory. Agency theory talks about the fact that we're doing work for somebody else. When we work for a corporation, we're an agent for that corporation. We're an agent for our boss. We're doing something that the boss is paying us to do. With agency theory, it says that the more people that, the bigger we become as an organization, the more managers we need to manage those people, because as an individual, we have competing interests. We have an interest to do the work that we're getting paid for, but we also have an interest to do what we want to do, to slack off, to look for another job, to watch the Cowboys lose to the Jets, those types of things. So we kind of have our own self-interest, if you will. IT, though, can help reduce agency costs by helping fewer people manage more people. And that's another thing that can occur with technology. So you see a relationship between agency cost and firm size. That the higher the agency cost, the lower the firm size. You can't afford to grow too large with high agency costs. So the impacts on an organization with these theories at work, it tends to, or with technology being applied to in these organizations, it tends to flatten out the organizations. You don't have to have as large of a top of the pyramid, if you will. You don't have to have as many managers. So it flattens out the organization. So you might see an organization go from something like this, where you've got a lot of line workers down here at the bottom, and then just lots and lots and lots of mid-managers, to something that's a little bit more flatter. You've got still the people down here producing the cars. You've got a few managers because you've got to have a few coordinating activities, things like that. And then your senior boss, CEO, or whatever. So you see much flatter organizations because technology really helps you to streamline a lot of the management activities. Now, we've talked about this quite a bit tonight already, organizational resistance to change. Information systems become bound up in organizational politics because they influence access to key resources, information. If you've got the information, you've got the power. People don't like to give up power, and so you see this resistance to change. People don't like change. They're used to things that the way they are. This is what they know. This is the information that they have. That's how the world works in their mind. Once you change that dynamic, they throw a fit. They don't want to have to learn something new. So you kind of have to, especially if you're younger, it makes it easier for you to be much more accepting to change. But as you get older, as you get set in your ways, you're going to fall into that same type of mentality. Information systems potentially change an organization's structure, culture, politics, and work. Why? Because it does help you to automate a lot of that stuff. That means some of those middle managers have to be retrained or laid off. They've got to learn new skills. That's part of that change. If you want a job, you retool. Most common reason for failure of large projects is due to organizational and political resistance to change. That is probably the most important statement that you get in the class. Very rarely do IT projects fail because of technology. That's very rare that happens. The vast majority of the time it's due to resistance to change. It's the fact that the project leaders are doing a poor job of selling the project to users. It's due to users that just flat don't want to do something. It's due to unrealistic expectations on the part of the users. There's a whole host of reasons why projects fail. Very rarely is it because the technology just can't do what we said it could do. It's usually because of other reasons. We just don't manage the project properly. So when you see technology introduced into a company, or new technology introduced into a company, you really have to see, the impact on the organization from other perspectives as well. It creates change in the tasks that occur. It creates change in the people, what they're doing, the tasks that they have to do, the order in which they have to do them, who has to do them, and it changes the structure of the organization. So when you introduce new technology, it changes multiple facets of the organization all at one time. And it talks about, in the book, somewhere in this section, it talks about this concept of unfreezing, teaching this new process, and then refreezing. And it's this idea that an organization is used to doing things in a particular way. When you introduce a new project, or a new technology, it's going to change how you process orders, for example. So you've got to unfreeze the process that was being used. You unfreeze that. You teach your employees this new process of processing an order, the new task of processing an order. Once you've trained them in performing this new process, now you can refreeze it, and they refreeze this process, refreeze this task, so that this user now has been trained on this new procedure. So it's just a way of looking at the organization and how they go about processing change in an organization, how they deal with technology changes. That you see a change in the people, you see a change in the structure, you see a change in the tasks at the same time. The Internet and organizations. The Internet increases the accessibility, storage, and distribution of information and knowledge for organizations. The Internet can greatly lower transaction and agency costs. So some of those costs that we were talking about earlier, the Internet can really help us to lower a lot of those costs. What does that mean? That means that, again, more pressure on fewer middle managers. It means that we can reduce a lot of those costs associated with transactions because we can automate a lot of that stuff. Electronic data processing was used for a long time by organizations that were large enough to be able to afford the technology. That was great. But if you were a small organization or even a mid-sized organization, in a lot of cases you couldn't afford that electronic data processing. The Internet's changed that. The Internet allows a cheap access to transmission lines all over the world, so you can process orders much cheaper. And so it really gives everybody the ability to lower a lot of those transaction costs. Central organizational factors to consider when planning a new system: the environment that you work in, so the type of regulations that you might face as an organization. Heavily taxed, heavily regulated in things that you can do, can't do. You have hazardous materials, things like that. The structure of the organization, type of hierarchy, specialization routines, business processes. So, is it a distributed type environment where lower level people can make lots of decisions, or is there a strict hierarchy to it where you've got to go all the way up the chain of command to make a decision? Culture and politics, types of organization, and style of leadership, main interest groups affected by the system, attitudes of end users, tasks, decisions, business processes, etc. So with all this idea of an organization, what an organization is and all that, how come there's differences from one organization to another? Why do some firms become leaders in their industry? Michael Porter's competitive forces model, some people refer to it as this 5 forces model, is one way of looking at an organization and trying to assess where an organization is with respect to their competitors, with respect to their environment, their position within the industry. So those 5 competitive forces are traditional competitors, new market entrants, substitute products and services, customers, suppliers. So if you look at somebody like GM, they've got traditional competitors. They've got Ford, they've got Chrysler, they've got Toyota, etc. You've got a threat to new market entrants, and maybe not anymore, but here a few years ago, somebody like Kia, a newer company, might be considered a new entrant, the threat of a new entrant. Substitute products and services, maybe a bicycle is a substitute product. Certainly plane travel is for trips that are a few hundred miles. Customers have power in this relationship. If there's a lot of suppliers to a particular product, and again we can stick with cars, there's a lot of different brands of cars. Toyota, BMW, Mercedes, Volkswagen. There's just a lot of different types of different brands of cars. So customers have a fair amount of power in that particular relationship. If you go to a Chevy dealership and you don't like what you're hearing, you just go across the street to another dealership and purchase a different product. So in that relationship, you have a fair amount of power as a customer. If there's only one manufacturer in a particular industry, that manufacturer has a lot of power. A few years ago, in the software industry for operating systems, Microsoft had a tremendous amount of power, and they still do. But relative to a few years ago, they had a lot of power. If you were going to buy an operating system, you got Windows or you got a toy, and that was pretty much it. Today, you see Apple, who made huge strides. You see Linux that's out there that more and more people are becoming familiar with. So there's starting to be some alternatives to Windows. But a few years ago, Microsoft really had a lot of power. So that relationship between the power for the customer versus how much power they have, either a lot or a little, that can affect the firm's position in the industry. And then the power of suppliers. Again, if there's a lot of suppliers, it's kind of the reverse view of that. If there's a lot of suppliers, the supplier doesn't have much power relative to the customer. If there's few suppliers in a lot of cases can have some power. So there's kind of that relationship that you can look at these 5 different forces and analyze where a company is at or where an organization is at by looking at these 5 forces. So it's kind of a graphical view of Porter's 5 forces. Traditional competitors, this is kind of going through everything that we just got through talking about. All firms share market space with competitors. So virtually everybody's going to have a competitor. If you don't, it's a monopoly. But for the most part, everybody has traditional competitors. New market industries. Some industries have high barriers to entry. What are we talking about when we say high barriers to entry?
Excessive capital cost.
Yeah, something that's going to cost a lot of money. Automotive industry. I mean, you got to buy these huge plants. You've got to have a workforce that's capable of producing automobiles. Telecommunications industry, where you've got to buy these expensive towers, rights to airwave rights, and all this type of stuff. So there's certain industries that are very difficult to get into. There's other industries, you can throw up a website and you can be a multinational corporation overnight. I mean, it just depends on the particular market. Substitute products, substitute customers might use if your prices become too high. So, iTunes was really cheap. I mean, 99 cents a song. That's kind of expensive. If you can buy a CD for $10, maybe there's 18 songs on a CD, and that'd be $18 if you purchased song by song. But really, iTunes has made a pretty good model. I mean, you look at it now; they're obviously a major player with respect to music. Can customers easily switch to competitors' products? You can build up some switching costs. Switching costs, for example, might be something where you have customer loyalty cards. Think about
AT&T's contracts.
Oh yeah, your telephone contracts for one. They don't want you switching carriers, so if they can get you they'll give you a free phone if you sign a 2-year contract. Well, if you sign a 2-year contract, you're kind of locked into them for 2 years, or you can pay some extra money to get out of this. It creates a switching cost, literally a switching cost. Some of the customer loyalty cards that you have at various places that you go to, Kroger, for example, you take your card in there. It's great for them. It gives them marketing data as to what you're purchasing, but at the same time, you're getting discounts. And if you're getting discounts, that means you're less likely to go somewhere else. Suppliers. Market power of suppliers when a firm cannot raise prices as fast as suppliers. So if your suppliers are able to switch prices pretty quickly, but you can't, you can end up shifting some of that power to suppliers. So something to be wary of. You don't. Everybody heard of the expression, don't put all your eggs in one basket? You don't want to have all your product come from one supplier, because that one supplier can really wreak havoc on you as an organization. So 4 generic strategies for dealing with competitive forces enabled by using IT. Low-cost leadership. Walmart would probably be a very good example of that. It's just kind of a generic strategy. In a lot of cases, you'll see these 4 strategies used together. You might see 1 or 2 used by the same firm. In other cases, they just use one. Product differentiation. It's one of the great things about technology is it really allows you to use what's referred to as mass customization. You look at a firm, look at a lot of automobile manufacturers, for example, and they're able to give you a lot of different features and really not cost all that much. Something that if they were doing by hand, it would cost you a fortune. There's an example in the book where you could order, I think it was Nike shoes for like $10 extra, and you could get your own colors, you could put it together however you wanted, you could get your own logo on it, all this type of stuff for 10 extra bucks. So you can really differentiate your product by being able to offer some of that stuff that really wouldn't be feasible if you're doing stuff by hand. But because we're using computers and various other technologies to be able to do that, we can do it on a mass scale. Focus on a market niche. In some cases, we can charge a higher premium for products, but it's because we're focusing on a smaller market segment. We're doing something for a particular segment that mass merchandisers aren't doing. So, for example, my parents sell turntable needles. Who knows what a turntable is? Okay, there's a few. That's what we had before tapes and all that other kind of stuff. Or records. There's not a lot of places that sell turntable needles, so it's kind of a niche market, and you can make some decent money doing that. Strengthening customer and supplier intimacy. So allowing some of those relationships to exist between suppliers and their customers that you really couldn't have before. Organizations used to be pretty close. You didn't share information. You didn't open up your systems to your people that were upstream or people that were downstream in the supply chain. But now we're starting to do that. We're starting to see the benefit of doing that. And that's why you start to see this being combined in many cases with low-cost leadership. You see Walmart opening up their systems to a lot of their suppliers so that when you swipe something across the scanner at Walmart, not only does Walmart know it back in Bentonville, but so do their suppliers. So everybody knows I've got to produce another, whatever it is, fudgesicle or whatever. Dr. H.Schuessler's getting another one. Okay, so low-cost leadership, product differentiation, Google, Nike. Focus on market niche. I give an example in the book on health and hotels. Strengthening customer and supplier intimacy. They talk about Netflix and Amazon in the book. Probably one that I would talk about would be Apple. Apple is really started to try to strengthen their relationships with some of the organizations, because where they're making their money is on iTunes, and not the content, but the process that facilitates the content to the hardware and the hardware itself. They're not making money on the content directly. So they have to have very strong relationships with content providers, because that's the lesson that they learned, was that without content, their products don't sell. So this is the one that we're talking about in the discussion group right now, so I'm not going to worry about that one. The Internet's impact on competitive advantage. Transformation, destruction, threat to some industries. So look at some industries. They're gone or leaving rapidly. Travel agency. When's the last time anybody used a travel agency? When?
In summer.
This last summer?
Yep.
Okay. Wow. Most people use Travelocity, Expedia. That's what's Orbitz. You just do, because it's easy. You can do it on your own. You do it in the middle of the night, however you want to do it. printed encyclopedias.
You still buy those?
Huh?
I didn't know you could still buy those.
I don't know if you can or not. I bought a set when my daughter was very young, and that was right before you saw Microsoft put out the whole thing on a DVD or CD-ROM or whatever it was. Newspapers, they're struggling a lot. So you see entire industries that are either vanishing, completely gone, or rapidly on their way out. They're having to transform themselves. You look at newspapers specifically, they provide a lot of valuable content. They've got a lot of journalists that understand how to do a story, how to investigate various things. But how do they transform that model to online where people don't want to pay for that content? It becomes a problem. They've got to figure that out if they want to continue to make money. Competitive force is still at work, but rivalry more intense. Why? Because now your rivalry isn't the paper next door, the other paper in town. There's competitors all over the world. People may not be interested in the local news. They can read for free national news, state news, federal, or international. There's a lot of different competitors that you have now. Universal standards allow new rivals, entrance to market, and new opportunities for building brands and loyal customer base. Okay, so this is the one I want to give you guys a few minutes to get together and talk about this particular case. Is the iPad a disruptive technology? So I want you to go ahead and read that. I'll give you about 10 minutes to read it. And then I want the different groups to look at stuff. So let's have Team 1. You guys look at question 1 in the case study. Team 2, look at question 2. Team 3, look at question 3. And then Team 4, I want you to look at the MIS in action, question number 3. So I'll give you about 10 minutes to look through.
It's on page 103, by the way.
It's on page 103 if you haven't looked at it. Thank you. Step through that. So Team 1, what do you guys identify as their evaluating the impact of iPad use towards competitive forces model? If you look at those 5 forces, what did you come up with?
There's already in place traditional competitors.
Who are some of those traditional competitors?
You've got to be Kindle, which has come in at about $120 an item instead of $500. You've got the Android devices that are hitting the market at about $299 and have all the apps.
BlackBerry, Samsung.
Yeah. What about substitute products?
And Airbooks.
Netbooks, laptops.
Yeah, I think that's a good read. I mean, they're not exactly the same. Some people would say you can do the same things and you can do similar things. Yeah.
And the price points on those are dropping like a rock.
Yep. Yep. Let's see.
Suppliers.
Yeah. What about some of the others? You got substitution.
Well, suppliers is actually interesting, especially when you look at content and the problems they're having with finding the content and trying to get content. Like the cable networks and satellite networks aren't willingly giving them access to the material because they don't want to lose their essential monopoly on it.
Do you think there's a threat to new entrants?
No, because we're doing a lot of open source formatting. You've got 2 competing things. It's almost back to the Sony Betamax and the VHS model, where you've got Android and Apple's iPhone or iPad trying to do it, but they basically open source development up to the marketplace.
I think the interesting thing about the iPad is it doesn't fit neatly into a category, because you guys identified as a competitor, something like the Nook or the Kindle.
They also have the Galaxy S's and stuff like that.
Yeah, and those are more in line directly with the iPad. These others are ebook readers. The new Nooks are becoming more functional. They're open source, using Linux, and the advantage to those is they don't use proprietary formats for the ebooks. So you can read PDF files on them, as opposed to Amazon's Kindle, which has a proprietary format for the ebooks. So it's kind of interesting. You look at the Kindle as the example they talk about in the book, how they're kind of a first mover into ebooks in terms of this nice little format reader. But at the same time, because of their closed nature, if you look at if you look at the history of technology, a lot of those closed-ended systems may get your foot in the door, but you end up losing out in the long run because people don't want to get locked into something like that. So it'll be kind of interesting how that plays out. I'm really pretty interested in the Nook myself, but I just can't bring myself to spend any money on stuff like that right now. Team 2, what did you come up with? Number 2, what makes the iPad a disruptive technology? Who are likely to be the winners and losers if the iPad becomes a hit, and why? A volunteer.
We just kind of talked about, the different winners would obviously be the hardware. Obviously Apple would be the winner, and the rest of the losers, anybody, Kindle, even, the smartphones and things, the laptop companies. Although in my opinion, I don't think that it would, I could be wrong, I don't think that it would ever completely replace the need for a laptop or for a hardcover textbook. Some people, I have a Kindle, I like using it for, just to read, but I don't think I would ever want to use it as my only textbook provider, just because there's not as much, flexibility with it and stuff. So I think that there may be like a chunk taken out, but I don't think that it would completely eliminate, your hardcover books or your textbooks or anything like that, or your laptop. I mean, these are just different functions that you would need. But I definitely think that it does make them have to reformat their, kind of like it was talking like with Amazon, they were able to force them to charge a certain price, but now that, Apple's got these contracts, they're renegotiating, and so the publishers like that better. Amazon has to, reformat their strategy in order to keep up with that, or else.
Do you think it's a disruptive technology?
I think so.
I think most people would agree that it is. You've had a stab at tablets before, back in the 90s, and people thought they were cool, but nobody was willing to spend money for cool back then. At least not that much money. The price has come down considerably on stuff like that, and the functionality has gone way up. So between those two factors, a lot of people are willing to spend money on it. My daughter has one, and she absolutely loves the thing. The price of them is small enough. The battery life is small enough. Will last long enough on them, and the features that you have on them now really make them a nice little thing to have. I tend to agree with you. As far as an ebook reader, I think they're fine for casual reading, for textbooks. I don't like ebooks in general for textbooks because most students just think it's a cheap way to not read the book. And if you've got a physical book, you almost feel like you're obligated to crack the book. That's not all students. I don't want to.
I had soul-feed books that I returned at the end of the semester.
I'm just telling you from my perspective what I see. So, and other professors that I've talked to, some students absolutely do read ebooks. In fact, I was looking around earlier. Somebody had an ebook open. So there are people that use ebooks, but at the same time, there's a lot of students that they don't ever use the ebook. They never bother to log in and check it out. Let's see, Team 3. Describe the effects that the iPad is likely to have on the business models of Apple, content creators, and distributors.
Business effects, or the effects on the business model for Apple is stated right there in the case at the end. It basically says that they realized that their old way of thinking, where they it says burn and distribute, which were designed to sell devices, are a thing of the past, and they're having that the company's new goal is to make deals with each media industry and try to distribute the content that users would want to watch and that sort of thing. And then as far as like content creators, a lot of the companies are going to have to stop investing in their traditional delivery platforms, like having to truck books to a store so people can buy them. They can just shoot them over the web electronically, and so they're going to have to to change that aspect of their business to focus more on the digital end. And then for the distributors, where they said that music labels used to sell songs, they would make more songs by selling an album. Well, now they've got iTunes out there, and it's a lot more profitable for them to sell songs one at a time. And so they're going to have to change that whole model as well.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when you look at Apple as a company and Steve Jobs as an individual. And you look at the history of Apple, how it really was all about Steve Jobs and a little bit about Steve Wozniak. And that when he left the company, or got fired as he refers to it, left, whatever he did, however that happened, that they did well for a brief period of time, and then they tanked. And so it'll be interesting to see how they do now that he's left again because of health reasons. But he really kind of matured. If you looked at his entire lifespan with the company, he really matured because he's always been a technologist, and he always understood the technology, and that's what he was always about producing the best products that he could possibly produce. But what he started to realize over the last several years is that a lot of this has to do with business. He's starting to understand the business side of things, and that's where that content stuff comes into play. And so now he's able to look at somebody like the Kindle and look at their pricing structure and look at what Amazon's trying to do into forcing an artificial price structure on these ebooks. And they can step back, and as Apple, they can step back and look at that and say, that may not be the best approach. And so they can modify it so that they can develop stronger relationships with some of these content providers, and as a result, be in a stronger position because you'll see more allegiance to Apple products rather than Kindle. I think the Kindle's days are numbered, even though they're the dominant player right now. It's just, they kind of painted themselves into a corner. Not to say that Amazon doesn't have some smart people too, but I think they goofed with that one. Team 4, what would you like to use an iPad or Kindle for? Would you like to use an iPad or Kindle for the books you use in your college courses, or read for pleasure instead of traditional print publications? Why or why not?
We don't use iPads or Kindle for textbooks, but eventually it's fun. With an iPad or Kindle, we get a lot more stuff to do, so it basically also good for instruction. So.
Have any of you used an ebook reader before?
I have used it.
What did you like it? Was it easy to use? Was it intuitive?
It's easy to use, but only for novels or stories and all. I have never read a textbook.
Okay. It is a matter of time. I know I certainly have my own feelings towards it, but in a lot of ways it's similar to online classes. I think you get better instruction in a face-to-face class, for the most part. There's some classes that are fine in an online environment, but I think for the most part you do better in a face-to-face class. But the writing's on the wall. Everything's going to online, and that's the reality of the world that we live in. So it doesn't matter whether you like it or not, that's where we're going. The same thing's true with respect to ebooks. Eventually that's where we'll be. And traditional books will be in museums, and we'll be using some kind of reader for all the various books. So anyway, thanks for doing that. I think that was pretty good. So let's go ahead and fire this back up. So, the business value chain model. Okay, so Porter's 5 Forces gives you a nice little tool to look at an organization, to tell you where that organization is. It doesn't tell you much about what to do with that information, about how to be more competitive. It just tells you where you are. Looking at the business value chain allows you to kind of operationalize that and take that forward. So it views the firm as a series of activities that add value to products or services. Highlights activities where competitive strategies can be best applied, breaks them up into primary activities and secondary or support activities. At each stage, determine how information systems can improve operational efficiency and improve customer and supplier intimacy. You can use benchmarking and industry best practices. So it's going to look something like this, and it looks kind of generic, and it's meant to be because it's something that gets applied to various businesses in different industries. But essentially, you're going to have some kind of inbound logistics where you're acquiring raw materials. If you're a manufacturing firm, like an automobile manufacturer, again, you need that steel, you need tires, glass, etc. If you're a service company, you need supplies. If you clean carpets, you need supplies to clean carpets. So you need supplies. So it applies to whether you're a manufacturer or a service company. You've got your operations, where you actually do something. You actually build something. You actually perform the service, etc. You've got sales and marketing, contacting customers, letting customers know about what you do, what you sell, things like that. Service. Your car breaks. You got to be able to take it back in and get it fixed. You want the manufacturer to cover that. So there's the service side, and then there's the outbound logistics, being able to get that product to the customer. So we can combine all those together, and we've got our support activities, which really kind of span across all of those activities to provide our overall structure. So human resources, those span everything. We've got people involved at every step. Inbound logistics, operations, sales, marketing. It doesn't do you any good to not have people somewhere. You got to have them. So you can look at that. You can look at where you sit in with respect to quarters 5 forces, and you can look at this and try to say, where can we institute technology to kind of streamline some of our activities? We can look at our service operations and try to through benchmarking, identify where we are relative to some of our competitors, relative to the rest of the industry. Are we spending more money on service than they are? If we are, maybe we can use technology to kind of streamline some of our operations. Maybe we can use CRM software to handle our relationships, our contacts with customers a little bit more efficiently, a little bit more effectively with respect to each time they call or email or show up at the office. That was fine for the days when industries tended to move relatively slowly. We didn't have it wasn't a real dynamic environment. Today things change pretty quickly, and so as a result we tend to see things not just in terms of the firm itself, but the firm and its relationships with other firms. And that's where we come up with this concept of the value web, a collection of independent firms using highly synchronized information technology to coordinate value chains to produce product or service collectively. So when we start to think about an industry as a whole, we talked about a minute ago that this idea of vertical integration. We've got a firm that really needs to think about linking its value chain to the value chain of its suppliers, to the value chain of the other firms that are downstream from it. And that's where this value web comes into play, of linking up their information systems so that everybody knows what's going on, so that when a sale is made at the retail level, that's reflected all the way back up, so everybody, the raw material providers, know that they need to produce more raw materials. So it's more customer-driven, less linear operation than traditional value chains. So you tend to see something more along these lines right here, where you've got different industries that are all working together to be able to satisfy customer needs. Information systems can improve overall performance of business units by promoting synergies and core competencies. When we talk about synergies, everybody know what synergy means? It's the idea that the sum is greater than its parts. So 2 plus 2 equals 5 instead of 4. And it's this idea that we can use technology to be able to provide some certain synergy. So when we talk about certain bank mergers, that we can merge banks and end up having more customers, we end up with more customers, and we can reduce some of our outlets. We don't necessarily have to have as many banks. I don't know about you, but I notice when they put up new banks, it drives me nuts, because they're like 7-Elevens. There'll be 4 of them on the corners. Why do you need so many banks? Well, there don't need to be so many banks. If you have a merger, you can close down one of those banks, have the same service and more customers. So you can have those types of synergies that occur. Core competencies, activity for which a firm is a world-class leader. Core competencies is what we do really well. Whoever you are, it's what Mercedes-Benz does. They've got a core competency of designing and manufacturing automobiles. They're really good at it. everybody kind of has their own core competency. That's something that they do better than most other people. That's why they're in business. Everybody can't be the best, but they do it relatively good compared to their peers. Relies on knowledge, experience, and sharing this across business units. An example, Procter & Gamble's intranet and directory of subject matter experts. Something that they do to record information, to gather knowledge in that organization. So they have a place where other people in the organization can go and find the appropriate subject matter experts. So somebody has a question, log into that directory and you can find that person. It's something that they do well. They share information, and it's led to other successes for P&G. Network-based strategies. When they talk about network-based strategies, they say take advantage of the firm's abilities to network with each other. When they talk about network-based strategies, there's this idea in economics referred to as the law of diminishing returns. And the law of diminishing returns says that the more you invest in something, it gets to a point where it's not worth it anymore. That you're investing too much and getting too little back out. Network-based strategies say that that doesn't always apply. So for an example, think of a fax machine. Imagine what it was like to be the first person to buy a fax machine. What did you do with it? Who did you fax? Who did you receive faxes from? Nobody. Network-based strategies say that when that next person buys it, that fax machine's a little bit more valuable. When another person buys it, it's even more valuable. When everybody has them, it's very valuable. So it's a little bit different. It's a different way of looking at things compared to the law of diminishing returns. And it doesn't always apply, but there are certain situations where it does. And technology can allow you to take advantage of network-based strategies in some situations, like fax machines, email, things like that. That's essentially what we're talking about right there. Virtual company strategy. Virtual company uses networks to ally with other companies to create and distribute products without being limited by traditional organizational boundaries or physical locations. Everybody heard of Vizio televisions? They don't manufacture TVs. They've never made a TV in their life. What they do is they contract with a firm out of China to manufacture them for them. Put their name on them. That's how they work. So they don't have to have that traditional structure of what the Sony does. They don't have to have a manufacturing plant. They don't have to have expertise in manufacturing all the various components that go into a television set. They don't have that traditional structure that a firm does. Virtual companies allow you to be able to do that. Business ecosystems. Industry sets of firms providing related services and products. The key word there is related services. They talk about Microsoft and Walmart and this concept of keystone firms. Keystone firms dominate the ecosystem and create platforms used by other firms. I think there's an example there. So you might kind of have multiple industries that all kind of work together. They are related. Think about the cell phone industry, for example. You've got manufacturers that produce the actual handsets themselves. Well, that industry doesn't do you any good without an industry that provides the carrier services, right? And it doesn't. You got a cell phone, but nobody that's got transmission towers. So you got industries that work together, and that's what they're talking about when they talk about these ecosystems, economic or ecosystems with respect to industries. So you got various industries that work together to be able to provide a service, but they've all got their own unique interests. They've all got their own unique things that they're trying to do. So even though there's some coordination and they have to work together to a degree, you also have to keep in mind that they also have their own interests as well. Now, sustaining competitive advantage, and this kind of ties into some of the homework when you get into that. Because competitors can retaliate and copy strategic systems, competitive advantage is not always sustainable. Systems may become tools for survival. This is technology. This is what we talked about before. Just because you implement a system, everybody else can do the same thing, if not immediately, pretty quickly. They've got to be willing to make that investment. You may have a competitive advantage with respect to being a first mover, but the technology in and of itself is not creating the advantage. It's the creativity to being able to apply technology in new and unique ways that's the real advantage. Performing strategic systems analysis. What is the structure of the industry? If you're trying to analyze where your business is with respect to Porter's 5 forces and the value chain, you want to look at the structure of the industry. Where are the competitors? Is it customers? Is it new entrants? Things like that. What are the value chains for your particular firm? Managing strategic transitions. Adopting strategic systems requires changes in business goals, relationships with customers and suppliers, and business processes. It's the realization that that change that we've talked about that's so painful for organization, it's the realization that that's the one constant in life. That's the one constant that your organization is going to have to go through. You have to figure out ways to go through change in ways that are less disruptive on your organization and that your organization can embrace and move through in order to take advantage of some of those opportunities. So that's it for that chapter. Any questions over that chapter or anything else we're doing? I know there were some groups that were talking about meeting together tonight, so we've got a few minutes that you guys can do that. The projects are, it's just a rough draft. It's not graded. I think I put that in the syllabus. This part's not graded. This is just a way for me to make sure that you guys are on track, you're doing the stuff that you need to be doing, all that kind of stuff. Whatever you turn in, I will look at. If you're missing some stuff, that's fine. I will look at what you turn in and try to give you some feedback so that you can, in the next stage, do a little bit better. So, any questions? Okie doke. Thank you for bearing with me. Have a good evening.